Zaraketh pressed her webbed fingers against the cold metal wall as another shudder ran through her ship. The deep current had been her home for 3 months as she studied the strange life forms that lived in the void between stars. Now it felt like a tomb. Water rushed past her feet in the corridor, but this was not the gentle flow of her ship's normal aquatic systems. This was chaos. She swam quickly through the flooded passage toward the control room. Her gills filtered oxygen from the water automatically, but she could taste metal and fear in the liquid around her. The collision with the asteroid debris had happened so fast. One moment she was scanning a cluster of space-dwelling organisms. The next her ship was spinning out of control with alarms, screaming through the water-filled chambers. The control room was a disaster. Broken screens flickered with emergency warnings while water poured through a massive crack in the hull. Zaraketh's large black eyes widened as she saw the extent of the damage. The breach was too big for the emergency systems to seal. Worse, the ship's internal ocean was flowing out into space. Taking her life support with it, she activated her emergency suit and swam to the communications panel. Her fingers moved quickly over the controls as she sent out a distress signal on all frequencies. The message was simple but desperate. Ship damaged, life support failing, coordinates attached. She knew no Aquarian vessel could reach her in time. Her people ships were fast in water but slow in the deep void. By the time help arrived from Tidal Prime, she would be long dead. The water level in the control room was rising faster now. What should have been her natural environment was becoming a prison. The uncontrolled flooding meant she couldn't reach the escape pods. They were designed to work when the ship was properly flooded, not during a catastrophic breach like this. The rushing water created currents too strong for her to swim against, and debris from the damaged systems made navigation impossible. Zaraketh tried to swim toward the engineering section, where she might be able to manually seal some of the smaller breaches. The corridor ahead was completely flooded now, which would normally be perfect for an Aquarian. But chunks of metal and broken equipment tumbled through the water like a deadly storm. She dodged a piece of hull plating that spun past her head, its sharp edges gleaming in the emergency lighting. Her breathing apparatus worked perfectly, extracting oxygen from the water around her, but the increasing pressure was becoming dangerous. The ship was designed to maintain specific pressure levels in each section. With the hull breach, those careful controls were failing. The water pressure kept building as more of the ship's internal ocean tried to squeeze through the damaged areas. She reached the engineering section and immediately saw that things were even worse than she had feared. The main power coupling was underwater, which was normal, but it was sparking and shorting out. Blue electrical arcs danced through the water around her, forcing her to swim in wide circles to avoid being electrocuted. Without main power, she couldn't operate the emergency hull sealing systems. Time was running out. Zaraketh could feel the ship's artificial gravity failing as more systems went offline. Soon she would be floating in a ball of water in space, unable to control her movement or reach any of the controls. She swam back toward the control room, fighting against stronger currents. Now, as the water sought the path of least resistance out through the hull breach, the distress beacon was still transmitting, its small light blinking hopefully on the communications panel. She had included her species information in the signal, though she doubted any alien race would understand aquarium biology well enough to help. Most spacefaring species lived in air, not water. They would probably assume she was already dead if they found her. Ship flooded. Another massive shudder ran through the deep current as it collided with more debris. The asteroid field around her was dense with fragments from some ancient collision. Her ship spun helplessly, its navigation systems offline and its engines damaged. Each impact drove more cracks through the hull, letting more water escape into the void. Zaraketh floated in the control room and tried to think of solutions. Her training had covered emergency procedures, but nothing like this. Standard protocol said to get to an escape pod and abandon ship. But the escape pods were unreachable now, trapped behind walls of rushing water and floating debris. The emergency suits could keep her alive in space for a few hours, but without a ship to pick her up, that would just mean a slower death. She thought of her family back on Tidal Prime, Her parents had worried about her taking this solo research mission, but the chance to study deep space aquatic life had been too exciting to pass up. Now she wished she had listened to their concerns. Her younger brother would blame himself for encouraging her to take the assignment. Her research team would wonder what went wrong when she failed to report back. The water around her was getting colder as the ship's heating systems failed. Aquarians could survive in cold water, but not indefinitely. Her body would slow down as the temperature dropped, making it even harder to think of escape plans. She was already feeling sluggish from the stress and the increasing pressure. More debris floated past the control room viewport. She could see stars spinning slowly as the ship tumbled through space. Somewhere out there, her distress signal was traveling at the speed of light, carrying her call for help to anyone who might be listening. But space was vast and empty. The chances of anyone receiving her signal in time were almost zero. Zaraketh closed her large eyes and tried to accept her fate. Drowning alone in space was not how she had imagined her life ending. For an Aquarian, drowning was the most shameful death possible. They were creatures of water, born to swim and breathe in the depths of their ocean world. To die by drowning meant failing at the most basic skill of her species. The ship shuddered again, and she opened her eyes to see more cracks spreading across the hull. Soon there would be nothing left but scattered debris and frozen water crystals floating in the asteroid field. Her research data would be lost along with her life. 3 months of careful observations and discoveries would disappear into the void, but the distress beacon kept blinking, sending its hopeful message into the darkness, carrying her voice across the empty space between stars. Captain Jake Morrison was drinking his morning coffee when the distress signal lit up his command screen. The Stormbreaker had been patrolling the outer edge of human space for 2 weeks, without seeing anything more exciting than a few smugglers trying to avoid customs checkpoints. The alien signal changed everything in an instant. Lisa Grant looked up from her pilot controls with surprise in her green eyes. She had been flying rescue missions for 5 years but had never seen readings like these. The signal was coming from deep in the asteroid field, and the ship sending it was unlike anything in their databases. The hull design looked more like a submarine than a spacecraft, with curved sections that made no sense for traveling through vacuum. Tony Martinez studied the technical readouts from his engineering station. His dark hair fell across his forehead. As he leaned closer to the screens, the alien vessel appeared to be completely flooded with water, which should have meant the crew was already dead. But the distress signal was still transmitting, and the bioscanners showed at least one life form still active inside the ship. Amy Foster prepared her medical station while trying to understand what kind of alien they might be rescuing. Her blonde hair was tied back in a practical ponytail as she worked. The medical computers had basic information about a few alien species, but nothing matched the readings from the damaged ship. She pulled up files on water-breathing creatures from Earth's oceans, hoping to find some clues about how to treat the survivor. Jake studied the tactical display showing the asteroid field ahead. The alien ship was tumbling through a particularly dense section where chunks of rock the size of buildings drifted in chaotic patterns. Getting close enough for a rescue would be dangerous, but leaving someone to die was not an option. His crew had sworn an oath to help anyone in distress. Regardless of species, the Stormbreaker accelerated toward the coordinates while Lisa calculated the safest approach route. She had to thread the ship between floating mountains of stone and metal, using thrusters to push smaller debris out of their path. The alien vessel came into view on their main screen, spinning slowly as it leaked streams of water into space. Like silver ribbons, Tony analyzed the ship's design and shook his head in confusion. The whole vessel seemed to be built around being filled with water. There were no airlocks that he could identify, and the hull had openings that looked more like gills than exhaust ports. The damage was extensive, with a massive breach in the side that was letting the ship's internal ocean pour out into vacuum. Amy ran simulations on her medical computer, trying to figure out how to treat a water-breathing alien. She flooded one of the emergency treatment rooms with water from the ship's recycling systems and adjusted the temperature. and pressure to match what their scanners detected inside the alien vessel. It was the best she could do without knowing more about the creature's biology. Jake opened a communication channel and tried to contact the alien ship. The response came back in a language none of them understood but the universal translation. Software slowly began to make sense of it. The voice was clearly female and filled with desperation. She was trapped inside her flooding ship and could not reach the escape systems. Lisa brought the Stormbreaker as close as she dared to the spinning alien vessel. The asteroid field around them was like a minefield of floating death, with new debris constantly breaking off from larger chunks. She had to use the ship's defensive guns to blast smaller rocks out of their path while maintaining position near the rescue. Target. Tony studied the problem from every angle and came to a disturbing conclusion. The alien ship was designed to be flooded, but the uncontrolled flooding from the hull breach was creating deadly currents and pressure changes inside. The creature was essentially drowning in her own life support system. Traditional rescue methods would not work because they could not dock with a ship that had no airlocks. Amy suggested using their emergency spacesuits to swim through the water inside the alien ship, but Tony pointed out that humans could not survive in the high-pressure aquatic environment. Their suits were designed for vacuum, not for swimming through alien oceans. They needed a different approach. Jake made the decision that would change everything. They would have to blow open the alien ship's hull to create a proper exit for the trapped survivor. It was a crazy plan that went against every rescue protocol, but it was the only way to save a life. He gathered his crew to explain the plan while the alien ship continued to tumble through the dangerous asteroid field. Lisa questioned whether destroying part of the ship was really the best solution. She worried that the explosion might kill the alien they were trying to save. But Jake explained that the creature was already dying from the uncontrolled flooding. A controlled explosion would give her a chance to escape, while doing nothing would guarantee her death. Tony began calculating the exact placement and strength of charges needed to create a clean exit without destroying the entire ship. He had to consider the water pressure inside the vessel and the way the explosion would propagate through liquid rather than air. It was unlike any demolition work he had ever done before. Amy prepared emergency medical protocols for treating an alien who lived underwater. She had no idea what their physiology would be like, but she gathered equipment for dealing with pressure injuries, drowning, and possible contamination from alien bacteria. Her medical training had never covered treating patients who breathed water instead of air. The Stormbreaker moved into position while Jake opened another communication channel to the alien ship. Through the struggling translation software, he tried to explain what they were going to do. The response was confused at first, then filled with what sounded like gratitude mixed with terror. The alien understood that the humans were trying to help, even though their methods seemed insane. Tony suited up and prepared to move outside the ship with his explosive charges. The work would have to be done quickly because the asteroid field was constantly shifting. One wrong move could crush both ships between massive chunks of floating rock. Lisa kept the Stormbreaker steady while debris bounced off their shields. Jake watched the countdown timer on his screen and thought about the consequences of his decision. If this worked, they would save an alien life and possibly make first contact with a new species. If it failed, they would be responsible for killing someone they had tried to help. But doing nothing was not an option for any rescue crew worth the name. The alien ship continued to spin slowly in the distance, trailing water like tears in the starlight while the Stormbreaker prepared to either save or doom its last surviving crew member. Tony Martinez checked his suit seals one final time before stepping into the airlock. His hands shook slightly as he secured the bag of shaped charges to his belt. He had blown holes in asteroid mines and cleared debris from shipping lanes, but never had he tried to save someone by destroying their ship. The irony was not lost on him as he prepared to commit what looked like an act of war to perform an act of mercy. Lisa Grant held the Stormbreaker steady against the chaotic forces of the asteroid field. Chunks of rock the size of cars drifted, tossed their hull while she used micro-thrusters to maintain position relative to the spinning alien vessel. Her green eyes were fixed on the navigation display as she calculated thrust vectors and debris trajectories. One mistake would send both ships tumbling into the rocky maze around them. Amy Foster made final adjustments to the flooded medical bay while monitoring the alien life signs on her scanner. The creature's vital signs were weakening as the pressure inside her ship continued to build. Amy had never treated someone who breathed water, but she understood that drowning was drowning regardless of species. The alien was running out of time. Jake Morrison stood at the command station watching his engineer float through space toward the damaged alien ship. Tony moved carefully between the floating debris, using his suit thrusters to navigate around chunks of metal and ice. The alien vessel grew larger in his helmet display as he approached, its curved hull gleaming with frozen water crystals. Zarakith felt vibrations through the water around her as something touched the outside of her ship. At first she thought it was another collision with asteroid debris, but the vibrations had a pattern to them. Something was moving deliberately across her hull. Through the cracked viewport she could see a figure in a strange suit working near the breach in her ship's side. Tony examined the hull breach up close and immediately understood why the alien was in such trouble. The ship was designed like a massive aquarium with water-filled chambers connected by passages that looked more like underwater tunnels than corridors. The uncontrolled breach had turned the vessel into a death trap where the life-giving water was becoming a killing flood. He began placing the shape charges according to his calculations. Each explosive device had to be positioned precisely to create a clean exit without causing secondary explosions that might kill the alien inside. The charges were designed to cut through metal like a hot knife through butter. But controlling the blast in a water-filled environment required perfect placement. Lisa watched the tactical display as more debris drifted toward their position. A chunk of asteroid the size of a building was tumbling slowly toward the alien ship. She calculated that it would arrive in about 10 minutes, which meant Tony had to finish his work and get clear before the collision. She opened the comm channel to warn him about the approaching danger. Amy monitored the alien's biosigns and saw them growing weaker. The creature's heart rate was irregular, and her brain activity showed signs of oxygen deprivation despite being surrounded by water. The increasing pressure was affecting her ability to extract oxygen from the liquid around her. They were cutting it very close. Tony finished placing the charges and began his careful retreat back to the Stormbreaker. He had to move quickly but smoothly to avoid disturbing the precise positioning of the explosives. One charge bumped out of alignment could ruin the entire plan. Behind him, the alien ship continued its slow tumble through space while water leaked. From dozens of smaller cracks, Jake opened a communication channel to the alien ship and tried to explain what was about to happen. The translation software was getting better at converting the alien language, but some concepts did not translate well. He tried to convey that they were going to create a controlled explosion to free her from her trapped ship. Zarakith understood that the strange aliens were trying to help her, but their plan seemed insane. They wanted to blow up her ship while she was still inside it. Through the failing communication system, she tried to express her gratitude while also questioning their sanity. But she was too weak to argue and too desperate to refuse any chance. At Survival. Tony reached the Stormbreaker's airlock and immediately began the detonation sequence. The charges were linked by wireless signals that would trigger them in perfect synchronization. The timing had to be exact to create a clean exit rather than a catastrophic explosion. He counted down from 10 while Lisa prepared to move the ship. Clear of the blast zone, the explosion lit up the asteroid field like a miniature sun. The shaped charges cut through the alien ship's hull with surgical precision, creating a large rectangular opening in the side of the vessel. Water erupted from the breach like a silver geyser, carrying debris and equipment out into space. For a moment, the alien ship looked like a punctured balloon as its internal ocean escaped into vacuum. Amy watched her scanners anxiously as the explosion faded. For several seconds, she could not detect any life signs from the alien ship and feared they had killed the creature they were trying to save. Then her instruments picked up movement near the newly created opening. Something was swimming through the escaping water toward their ship. Zaraketh felt the explosion as a sharp pressure wave that knocked her unconscious for a few seconds. When she woke, she was floating near a large hole in her ship's side with water rushing past her toward the opening. Her emergency suit activated automatically, providing propulsion and life support for travel through vacuum. She swam toward the light coming from the alien rescue ship. Lisa maneuvered the Stormbreaker closer to pick up the swimming alien. It was the strangest rescue she had ever performed, watching a creature that looked like a cross between a dolphin and a human swim through empty space using some kind of propulsion system built into her suit. The alien moved gracefully even in the vacuum, her large fins helping her navigate toward their ship. Tony watched in amazement as the alien approached their vessel. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, with blue-green skin that shimmered like scales and large black eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. Her movements through space were fluid and purposeful, nothing like the clumsy actions of a human in a spacesuit. Jake coordinated the rescue operation as Amy prepared to receive their unexpected patient. The medical bay was ready with its flooded treatment area, but they still had no idea if their preparations would be adequate for treating an alien physiology. They were about to make first contact under the most unusual circumstances imaginable. The alien ship behind them finally succumbed to the damage and began breaking apart as the massive asteroid chunk collided with its hull. Pieces of curved metal and frozen water scattered through the asteroid field like the remains of some ancient sea creature. But its former occupant was safe, swimming through space toward the humans who had risked everything to save her life. Amy Foster stood waist-deep in the flooded medical bay as the airlock cycled open to admit their alien patient. She had never imagined she would be treating someone underwater, but here she was preparing to save a life in an environment that would normally kill any human crew member. Her medical scanner was sealed in a waterproof case as she waited to see what kind of creature they had rescued. Zaraketh swam slowly through the airlock opening and into the strange new environment. The water here felt different from her ship's carefully maintained ocean systems. It was warmer and had a different chemical composition that made her gills work harder to extract oxygen. But she was alive, and that was more than she had dared hope for just minutes earlier. Jake Morrison watched through the medical bay viewport as the alien entered their ship. She was unlike anything he had ever seen, with blue-green skin that seemed to shift color in the light and large black eyes that reflected intelligence and curiosity. Her body was humanoid but adapted for aquatic life, with webbed hands and feet and gill slits along her neck that opened and closed rhythmically. Lisa Grant maintained their position away from the asteroid field, while keeping one eye on the first contact situation developing in medical. She had studied xenobiology as part of her pilot training, but all the textbooks in the universe could not have prepared her for actually meeting an intelligent alien species. The creature looked fragile and exhausted, but undeniably alive. Tony Martinez monitored the ship's systems while trying to process what they had just accomplished. They had blown up an alien spacecraft to save its occupant, and somehow the crazy plan had actually worked. Now they had a living alien aboard their ship, and nobody knew what to do next. The rescue manual had not covered this particular scenario. Amy approached the alien slowly, holding her medical scanner in front of her like a peace offering. She had no idea how to communicate with a species she had never met, but the universal language of medical care seemed like a good place to start. The alien's vital signs showed exhaustion and mild pressure trauma, but nothing that appeared immediately life-threatening. Zaraketh watched the strange creature approaching her with some kind of device. The alien was much smaller than her and seemed to need artificial equipment to survive underwater. Its skin was pale and smooth without scales or protective covering. Most remarkably, it appeared to be holding its breath while moving through the water, which seemed impossible for any intelligent species. The translation device on Zaraketh's emergency suit began working with the human computer systems, slowly building a bridge between their languages. The first words that came through were simple medical terms as Amy tried to assess her condition. The sound was strange and mechanical, but the meaning was clear enough to understand. Amy ran her scanner over the alien's body while speaking slowly. into the translation system. She explained that she was a medical officer trying to help, and asked if the alien was experiencing any pain or breathing difficulties. The response came back in heavily accented but understandable words that the alien was grateful to be alive but tired from her ordeal. Jake entered the medical bay wearing an emergency breathing apparatus that allowed him to speak underwater. The alien's large black eyes tracked his movement as he introduced himself as the captain of the rescue vessel. Through the translation system, he learned that her name was Zarakith and that she was a researcher studying deep space life forms. Zarakith tried to express her gratitude for the rescue while also marveling at the strange aliens who had saved her. They seemed to be air-breathing creatures who had somehow created an underwater environment just for her comfort. The fact that they would go to such lengths for a complete stranger of another species challenged everything she thought she knew about the universe. Tony joined them in the medical bay and immediately began asking technical questions about Aquarian ship design. Through the improving translation system, Zarakith explained that her people built their vessels to be completely flooded because they were most comfortable swimming rather than walking. The concept of traveling through space in air-filled ships seemed as strange to her as water-filled ships seemed to the humans. Amy discovered that despite their different biologies, Aquarians and humans had remarkably similar emotional responses to trauma and stress. Zarakith's elevated heart rate and nervous movements were easily recognizable signs of someone who had just survived a life-threatening emergency. The medical officer began treatment protocols that focused on rest and stress reduction. Lisa left the pilot station under computer control and came to see their rescued passenger. The alien's graceful swimming movements fascinated her as someone who had always been interested in flight dynamics. Zarakith moved through the water with an efficiency that made human swimming look clumsy by comparison, using her whole body to generate propulsion. Zarakith began sharing her story as the translation system improved. She had been alone on a research mission studying organisms that lived in the vacuum of space when her ship was damaged by asteroid debris. The uncontrolled flooding had trapped her inside her own life support system, creating a situation that would have been impossible for her people to resolve with traditional rescue methods. Jake learned that Aquarians had a deep cultural fear of dying alone, especially by drowning. For a species that lived in water, drowning was considered the most shameful possible death because it meant failing at the most basic survival skill. The fact that aliens had risked their lives to prevent such a fate moved Zarakith to emotions that the translation system struggled to convey. Amy noticed that the alien's stress levels were decreasing as she realized she was truly safe. The medical bay's water temperature and pressure had been adjusted to match readings from her damaged ship, creating an environment where she could rest and recover. It was the first time any human had attempted to create life support for an aquatic alien species. Tony shared technical information about human spacecraft design while learning about Aquarian engineering principles. Their two species had developed completely different approaches to space travel, with humans creating enclosed atmospheres while Aquarians maintained aquatic environments. Both methods worked, but they reflected fundamental differences in biology and culture. Zarakith asked about human society and was amazed to learn that they had risked an expensive rescue mission for someone they had never met. In Aquarian culture, such actions created deep bonds of obligation and friendship that could last for generations. She tried to explain the concept of current bonds, the idea that saving a life sends ripples through the universe that connect all living things. The medical bay became an impromptu first contact center as 4 humans and 1 alien shared stories and learned about each other's worlds. Despite the language barriers and biological differences, they found common ground in their shared experience of surviving in the hostile environment of space and their mutual respect for life and courage. The Stormbreaker moved steadily through space toward the nearest Aquarian outpost while its unusual passenger recovered in the flooded medical bay. Jake Morrison had changed course immediately after learning the location of Zarakith's people, but the journey would take 4 days at maximum speed. Those 4 days became the foundation for something neither species had expected when they first met in the chaos of the asteroid field. Lisa. Grant found herself spending hours in the medical bay learning about Aquarian navigation techniques. Zaraketh explained how her people used the gravitational currents between stars, the same way ocean creatures used water currents on their homeworld. The concept fascinated Lisa, who had always thought of space as empty void rather than a flowing medium with its own hidden patterns and movements. Tony Martinez discovered that Aquarian engineering was based on completely different principles than human technology, where humans built rigid structures to contain atmosphere. Aquarians created flexible systems that could adapt to changing pressure and flow conditions. Zaraketh shared technical data about hull materials that could heal themselves when damaged, and propulsion systems that worked like giant fins pushing against the solar wind. Amy Foster learned that despite their different biologies, Aquarians experienced emotional trauma in ways remarkably similar to humans. Zaraketh's recovery followed patterns that Amy recognized from treating human survivors of spacecraft accidents. The aliens' need for social contact and reassurance during healing showed that intelligence created similar psychological needs. Regardless of what planet it evolved on, Zaraketh taught the crew about her people's philosophy of current bonds, which held that all life in the universe was connected like water flowing through an infinite ocean. Every action created ripples that spread outward, affecting other lives in ways that might not be visible for generations. The humans who had saved her life had created bonds that would ripple through both their species for years to come. Jake spent long hours talking with Zaraketh about leadership and responsibility. She had been commanding her research mission alone, making decisions that affected not just her own life but the success of important scientific work. He shared stories about the weight of command and the difficulty of making choices when lives hung in the balance. Despite their different backgrounds, they understood each other's burdens. The translation system improved dramatically over the 4 days as both sides worked to build better communication protocols. What had started as basic medical terminology expanded into complex discussions about philosophy, science, and culture. Zaraketh's natural curiosity about human society matched the crew's fascination with learning about an entirely new form of intelligent life. Amy discovered that Aquarian medicine was based on principles of flow and balance rather than the human approach of fighting disease and injury. Zaraketh shared knowledge about treatments that used controlled water pressure and mineral solutions to heal damaged tissue. In return, Amy explained human surgical techniques and chemical medications that could target specific biological problems. Tony and Zaraketh spent hours comparing the engineering challenges of building spacecraft for different environments. The alien was amazed by human achievements in creating sealed atmospheric systems that could maintain perfect conditions across vast distances. Tony was equally impressed by Aquarian ability to build ships that could function equally well in water, atmosphere, or vacuum. Lisa learned that Aquarian pilots thought about three-dimensional movement in space very differently than humans. Where human training focused on thrust vectors and orbital mechanics, Aquarians approached space travel like swimming through an infinite ocean. Their ships could change direction and speed with fluid grace that made human spacecraft look clumsy. By comparison, Zaraketh was fascinated by human concepts of individual achievement and personal responsibility. Aquarian society was much more collective, with decisions made by flowing consensus rather than individual authority. She struggled to understand how humans could function effectively when everyone had different opinions about the best course of action. Jake found himself thinking about the implications of their rescue mission for future relations between their species. The Stormbreaker's actions had established first contact between humans and Aquarians, under circumstances that emphasized cooperation and mutual aid. It was a much better foundation for diplomacy than the usual pattern of accidental encounters that led to misunderstandings and conflict. The crew worked together to create a detailed report of the rescue operation and first contact situation. They knew that both governments would want to understand exactly what had happened and how the two species might work together in the future. Zaraketh contributed Her own perspective on events and her assessment of human character and capabilities. Amy helped Zarakith record detailed information about aquarium biology and medical needs in case future rescue situations required treating her people. The medical data would be invaluable for establishing formal diplomatic and trade relationships between the species. Both sides recognized that this chance encounter was just the beginning of much larger changes. Tony compiled technical specifications for equipment that could allow better cooperation between human and Aquarian spacecraft. Simple modifications to standard rescue gear could make it possible to help aquatic aliens in emergency situations. The knowledge gained from their improvised rescue would save lives in future encounters. Lisa worked with Zarakith to create star charts that showed the location of Aquarian colonies and trade routes. The information would be essential for human navigators who wanted to avoid accidentally intruding on alien territory. It also identified areas where the two species might work together on exploration and scientific research. On the fourth day, the Aquarian outpost appeared on their sensors as a collection of flowing organic shapes that looked more like coral reefs than artificial structures. Zarakith's excitement was visible as she recognized the architectural style of her people. She had been away from home for months, and the sight of familiar designs brought tears to her large black eyes. The outpost's response to their arrival was immediate and overwhelming. Aquarian ships surrounded the Stormbreaker as word spread that the missing researcher had been found alive. The story of her rescue by unknown aliens created a sensation among her people, who had assumed she was dead when her ship failed to report back on schedule. Jake found himself at the center of an impromptu diplomatic reception as Aquarian leaders boarded his ship to meet the humans who had saved one of their people. The rescue operation became the foundation for formal first contact between the species, with both sides eager to learn more about their new neighbors in the galaxy. Zarakith served as translator and cultural guide as the two groups began the delicate process of establishing communication protocols and mutual understanding. Her personal relationship with the Stormbreaker's crew provided a bridge of trust that made the larger diplomatic process possible, the Aquarian leadership declared. Jake Morrison, a current keeper, one who preserves life across the flowing streams of existence. It was their highest honor for someone outside their species, recognizing that his decision to risk everything for a stranger had created bonds that would benefit both civilizations for generations to come. As the Stormbreaker prepared to depart, with an Aquarian diplomatic escort, Zarakith exchanged communication codes with each member of the crew. The friendships formed during 4 days of recovery and learning would continue across the vast distances of space, proving that heroism and compassion could transcend any barrier between intelligent species.